This is Cold Start.
We were talking about what it was like getting into cars and car culture for the first time. And a really important part of that is that whole experience of thinking about what your first car is going to be, looking forward to that someday, realizing maybe that dream of your first car that you own, that's yours, that you can make a sort of a slice of your personality.
Yeah, and of course, when we're younger and we're going through magazines, and for me, that was DuPont Registry. Obviously, anything that's inside that magazine that we love to dream about as kids and car enthusiasts of these unbelievable piece of machinery, that's not the reality of your first car.
Yeah, we dream well beyond the headlights of those vehicles, if you will. That was the thing, looking forward to what kind of car maybe you would have someday in your life, or what were the kind of cars that inspired you. Yeah, I did the same thing. I remember reading DuPont and the Robb Report, but it was really the old, I don't even know if people will remember this, it was that old publication Auto Trader that was really my catalyst. And this was back a long time ago. So Auto Trader was still printed on newsprint back then. Yeah, so like, you know, the paper they use for newspapers and that ink, and it's like really kind of cheap. Yeah, the whole magazine was printed on those. And they were really thick, right? They were like 120, 150 pages of people selling their cars. And that was regional too. So it was like, at the time I was living in Florida when I was a kid. And so, yeah, there was like the Florida-wide Auto Trader, and there was just so much stuff in it.
I can imagine, there was plenty of options. You're probably, looking at some fun little sports coupes or something like that. Now, we're going to get into the stories of our first cars, because usually the harsh reality isn't something that's necessarily that exciting, but I feel like our first cars really shape us. And I feel like that first little introduction of having that piece of freedom and getting behind the wheel can really dictate what sort of subgenre in car culture you might get into as you become more of a car enthusiast.
You might say the unfortunate reality is we had poster cars. We had those iconic cars that we looked at and said, oh, maybe someday. But nobody really ever gets one of those for their first cars.
Oh, no, of course not.
Or their second cars, or their third cars in most cases, right? That's aspirational, and it's part of car culture that makes it actually really exciting to look forward to and dream about what the future of your car ownership might be, not knowing your circumstances, but just kind of shooting for the moon. Like you see those cars on the posters and you're like, man, someday I could have one like that. But I need to set my sights on maybe something a bit more modest, because then reality sets in.
Yeah, exactly. There's limitations when you get into your first car. I think first cars should always be something that's character building, right? And that's not necessarily the showroom stopper vehicle. That's going to be something that's a little bit rough around the edges. You're going to have to engage with in interesting ways. And first cars usually have a pretty good story of them, even though the car itself might not be the most significant thing in automotive history. It can always present a fun story time. So I think we should get into it. I mean, I think, Todd, you should start us off with what your first car was and what journey that was of living down in Florida, looking through maybe the Auto Trader classifieds and trying to find something to be your first set of wheels.
I remember sitting in school with the Auto Trader. Like, we'd read it all day long, and we'd pore over these things, and we'd just pass it around among friends and be like, what do you think of this one? What do you think of that one? And inevitably, it was all just looking. Like, we weren't actually pursuing these cars or calling the owners to try to set up a viewing because we knew we couldn't afford most of them. But the phrase you used, I think, was really appropriate: character building.
Yeah.
There's something about that first car not being everything that you hoped a car could ever be, not being your poster car, being sort of this thing that's a starter in a way that helps you understand what is it you've gotten yourself into? What are the implications and responsibilities of owning this thing?
Yeah.
It's a process that you go through to really understand and gives you appreciation for what you have. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I remember paging through Auto Trader and circling and highlighting all these ads. And the thing that I really had in my mind, and I don't even know where this came from because my family never really had one. I didn't really have any friends with these kind of cars, but I really wanted a late 60s Mustang, like a 67 or 68 was the car I sort of held in the highest regard. And I'd look in the Auto Trader and I'd see these things for sale, and man, they were a little out of my price range. But every once in a while there was one that would come through and it would be a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, maybe there's a chance, like maybe I can find one and get a project car or buy one that's just, quietly misunderstood car sitting in some older person's garage and they're just not using it. I may be able to get a bargain on it or something. But the reality was those cars, as cheap as they were at the time, and anybody listening to this now is going to have their minds blown. These cars were going for something like 3, 4, 5 grand.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which now you could never find a Mustang of that era, that vintage, for anything approaching that. But that was how much those cars were. Yet at the time, I was a pretty meagerly budgeted high school student. And I've been looking at these cars in the Auto Trader, since middle school, thinking about what I was going to want someday. And I got myself so far down this path on the Mustang. And when the time came, I was getting to be 14, 15 years old. And my parents, they were pretty liberal about it. They'd throw me the keys to the car and let me go drive. And I remember driving to baseball practice, when I was 14 years old, and some of the other parents being horrified because this kid was out there driving a car. But thinking for a long time about what I want that first car to be, and the Mustang really kind of firmly entrenched itself in my mind as that target. But I was so far away from being able to afford that. I worked jobs and had my part-time gigs that I would do as a kid, but I wasn't able to put away that kind of money. So it actually wound up being a sort of a unfortunate but fortunate set of circumstances. In the mid-'80s, my grandfather was really sick and eventually passed away. And he had a car that had been just sitting unused. And my mom was considering taking that car. She inherited it. But at the time, she had a different car and said, maybe this is the right one that we should make Todd's first car. And I was really excited about it. And then reality set in again. And I said, well, wait a minute. This isn't a Mustang. This isn't anything like I would have ever really wanted. But now a car is sort of falling in my lap. And any car is better than no car.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, just getting a set of wheels.
Yeah, any piece of crap is infinitely better than having no piece of crap. Right. So this particular car, my grandfather had for a while, and this was in Southeast Florida. And there was sort of an insect problem in this part of the world. And for whatever reason, he chose to solve the insect problem inside his car by spraying copious amounts of Raid in the car.
Oh, nice.
And if you've ever been in a room or even a building where somebody's spraying this insect spray, it's revolting. It smells bad. It smells like cancer, right? It just smells like you should not be breathing this stuff. And that was what was on offer. There was this car, and it was sitting there unused, and it reeked of bug spray. But it was ours, my family's, my mom's. And she said, this is going to be your first car. And it was a 1984 Chevrolet Cavalier sedan, white. At the time, it was like the most iconic Florida car you could imagine for like an old person driving around. It was not a good-looking car. And for those of you who may have some vague recollection, there was a Chevy Cavalier coupe that they made that was actually a little sporty-looking. It didn't have any sporty performance characteristics, but the car itself looked okay. But the sedan did not. The sedan was really, really bland design.
Yeah, I don't think the Cavalier was ever a good-looking car.
No.
Or a car of any sort of substance in regards to automotive anything. Looking at it, it looks like the generic representation of American Econobox.
Yeah, during that what they called the malaise era.
Where everything was just shrink it, make it small, make it cheap, make it somewhat fuel efficient.
Yeah, and it was somewhat fuel efficient. That's probably its strongest attribute.
Yeah.
Power was not. I think the car was rated about 88 horsepower, running in its inline 4-cylinder engine. I think the car was devoid of any options. I think the AM/FM radio was potentially an option. The cloth seats came standard, and there was no other option. There was nothing else. There was nothing else on the car. It was like the most functional, boring, white sedan you could imagine. And as a 16-year-old kid, I wanted to be excited about this because now I have a car. I have my own car. It's freedom. It's a ticket to me getting out there and going and doing things. And in my mind, I'm like, how am I ever going to meet a girlfriend, drive around in a car that looks like this? This is not something that's going to help you pull a mate.
Yeah, no, I'm totally getting those movie scene pictures where it was like the kid that got his first car and it's a piece of crap, but all of his friends are like stoked that like someone has a car.
Someone has a car. We
Like,
can go places.
Having a car, regardless of how crappy it is significantly better than, oh, we have to ride our bikes or walk or whatever the case is. So I'm sure like getting it, there is that sensation of, oh my God, the freedom, and I get to be that friend that has a car in high school, which maybe back then not everyone had cars or wasn't as like accessible.
Yeah. And one of those things was the area where I went to school. My family was not by any means well-to-do. Like, we were probably low middle class at best. And everybody else around in this area seemed like they were a lot more well-off.
Yeah.
So there were kids that were 16 years old that were getting new cars. Some actually very fancy cars. There's always that example at your school. You remember the kid who got the BMW for their first car or whatever.
Yeah.
There were some of those out there too. But no, it was really a matter of, I got a car. And that's awesome because now we have literally this vehicle that can take us around and we can go do stuff and get up to whatever kids get up to. And I was really excited about the prospect. But then when reality set in, I'm sitting in this car and it sort of reeks of bug spray and it's just inherently uncool. It was an uncool car by any stretch. And there weren't really any mods that I could make or afford to make that would have really helped it. At the time, you could go to like the AutoZone or the O'Reilly or whatever the local car parts store was and find these little things you could put on your car to kind of like make it sporty. They had, I don't know if you remember these. In the 80s, there was these double windshield wipers that they came out with, and they came in different colors. And so people would, quote unquote, trick out their car by putting on these like hype new windshield wipers that looked really kind of ugly and over. And some of them even had little louvers on the side of the windshield wipers that you could add to your car. Like, these are the kind of mods that I was starting to look at, and I decided none of those made any sense on this car. This is not a car that's even worth trying to mod. It barely ran. You know, it was, for a couple-year-old car, pretty unreliable. It didn't start up smoothly. The idle was rough. And did I mention it smelled like bug spray?
I was going to say, making this thing sporty, you'd probably be just wasting your money trying to make a Chevy Cavalier anything that it isn't. So tell me some of the fun stories that you had in this vehicle. Well, one, how long did it last? Because it sounds like it didn't really run well to begin with. How long did you have this thing? And like, what are some of the highlights and maybe lowlights of having this vehicle?
Looking at cars and then winding up with this one, it was a gift. So I appreciated it and I tried to use it as what it was. But it was really hard not to feel sort of let down as a kid getting in this thing and realizing this is your vehicle now. This is what you got to show. So it was probably about a year and a half of ownership of this car, during which there were several mechanical problems. I don't remember all the details of them, but at one point, the transmission started making this chunking, kind of really bad clunking sound. And this car was a front-wheel drive, 3-speed automatic transmission car.
3-speed?
3-speed automatic.
Well, I guess with 88 horsepower, how many more speeds do you need?
Yeah, and you didn't need like the most robust power plant ever, since you're not going to put so much torque through the thing. I think it had like 100 foot-pounds of torque at low RPM.
Lawnmowers have more torque than that.
Oh, no question. No question. They would totally beat this car off the line in a drag race if you were in a lawnmower, any kind of good lawnmower. So, you know, the car went through its cycle of problems here and there. Eventually, the transmission did give out. And I remember being in a parking lot where I tried to throw the car from park into drive. And it was like somehow I put it in neutral, but the stalk was definitely in drive. And on the dash, it definitely showed being in drive. But when you got on the accelerator, it was like you were in neutral. Like the drivetrain just disconnected, or like the gear on the transmission no longer was available to you. So you'd get on the gas and you'd rev it, and the RPMs would go up, and you'd see it on the tach, but the car wouldn't move.
Nice.
Yeah. So really, you know, high quality engineering from that era of cars. Something that's kind of funny about that specific model was that GM was in this cross-platforming mode for many years where they'd come up with a base model and then rebrand it with a bunch of different badges on it.
Uh-huh.
So this car was, as far as I'm aware, at least a Buick, a Chevy as it was originally badged, an Oldsmobile, and then I think one of the ones that was most famous for becoming eventually was a Cadillac. This was called the Cadillac Cimarron. And if you're not familiar with it, go back and look up the Cadillac Cimarron. There were a series, and we just need to do our Cadillac episode once and for all and get that over with. But we've talked about these cars before. The Cadillac Cimarron and the Cadillac Catera, coming from the mid-'80s period of Cadillac trying to figure out how to build an efficient car and failing miserably at doing so. And one of the worst examples of badge engineering that has ever been performed on a vehicle was the Chevy Cavalier variant that they called the Cadillac Cimarron.
Fascinating. I know nothing about these cars. This is like American 1980s automotive.
Going deep.
That's like blind spot for me.
And the thing is, it's not going to get any clearer for anybody because there's so few of these cars left to be had. First of all, because they were unreliable and a bunch of them wound up being junked. But later on, when that Cash for Clunkers program came around in the late 90s, I think it was, or early 2000s, a lot of these cars just went to the crusher.
Yeah, because, I mean, they seem like back then they were built just to be almost consumable. Like, they didn't last. Speaking of this, the show that I was at this morning, there was a Ford Probe, and I was so excited. It was the Probe 2, the second generation, the 90s, like the swoopy design one. Speaking of vehicles that, like, went to the crushers, no longer exist, the funniest thing, the owner and driver of this Ford Probe, in decent condition, was probably a 19-year-old girl.
No way.
That had this Ford Probe.
Wow.
Now, I didn't ask her how she got it, but I was like, how does a kid end up getting a vehicle like this that like so many people in the automotive space have forgotten about?
You almost are guaranteed this was a family passed down.
Had to have been.
Right. Hand me down from an older grandparent or an uncle or an aunt or something. Yeah, almost in any circumstances, because nobody who's young knows about these cars because there's nothing worth seeking out about them.
Right. Or if they did know about them, no one's going out to go buy one.
And let's be clear, these were poor cars by just about any measure. Every once in a while, like the Probe at the time, you could say was sort of sporty looking and a little futuristic, and they were trying to lean in on that. But yeah, overall, the cars were pretty terrible. And I think that's a fairly universal experience for kids with their first cars is, you know, with the exception of the really well-to-do families or kind of rich kids who get, you know, something really fancy out of the box. Having that character-building car is part of the experience of building car awareness and appreciation. You know, when you look around on the road and you see just all these cars all the time, how do you pick out what you think is cool, what you like, what someday maybe you could see yourself rolling around in, what someday you would never in a million years go near that car? And the experience you have with these usually meager, low budget, not totally put together, not totally to your preference kind of cars really influences that. And it influenced that for me, for sure. I don't believe after that Chevy Cavalier, I'd acquired another GM product for more than 20 years, easily.
Nice.
It just put me off, right? Because I knew the thing was just a piece of garbage.
Right.
It didn't run well. It didn't look good. It didn't give me a good feeling. It was hard to go out and even hoon around in this car. Like try to go out and we'd go try to fishtail the back of the car. These front-wheel drive cars were really tail-happy that way. But no, these wouldn't even do it. They were just not made for doing anything other than very, very basic transportation and unreliably at that on occasion.
So what did your friend group think about? Like, what was their opinion when you got this Chevy Cavalier?
It was sort of what you thought. Oh, cool, we got a car in the pool, like another car that can take us places. But it was never the first choice. You know, I had another friend who, I think within a few months of me getting my car, wound up with a mid-1980s Nissan Maxima. And the quality difference, the cool factor difference of the Maxima compared to the Cavalier could not be overestimated, could not be estimated. It was so much more preferable every time we'd go somewhere. Hey, what car do we want to take? The Maxima. Nobody ever said, let's take the Cavalier. It was always the last choice, last ditch. Okay, fine, we have a car. We're appreciative of that. But it was never the thing anybody ever wanted to go in.
Yeah, no, I can imagine you were very excited, maybe excited when the transmission went out on the Cavalier of like, maybe my time with this car is over and I can move on to something else. And so was the death of the transmission the death of the Cavalier for you?
Eventually, yes, but it took some back and forth with the mechanic and rebuilds and trying to get the car up and running again because it was obviously less expensive to fix the car than it would be to acquire something new. When I say obviously, that's not always the case. We see this a lot, especially in older cars that are in this state where They're still running. They're still pretty reliable, but now they'll probably cost more in repairs than it would cost to buy another one.
Right, right.
And this car got to that point where it was like, look, it's going to be several $1,000s to fix this car that's barely worth several $1,000s. So what do we do? So that was the end of the Cavalier, and I went back to saving mode because I now caught the fever. I had a car. I felt that freedom. I needed to be out there driving around and not relying on my friends for rides, not having, God, the lamest thing in the world, having your mom take you to school.
Yeah.
You didn't want to be that dude. And I can borrow my mom's car on occasion, but, her car was just as bad as this Cavalier. So she had a Chevy Celebrity.
Never even heard of it.
Yeah, don't bother. These were all similarly platformed cars. They all had kind of a lot of characteristics in common. And it wasn't like we were a big GM or Chevy family. It was just kind of what we could afford.
Right.
It was around. So that's sort of my story. It's not something I look back with a lot of sentimentality about. Like if I saw another Cavalier on the road, which is rare these days, it might be worth a giggle or something, but I don't get that feeling like, oh man, I really miss it and I really want to go back and re-experience that feeling that I had being in that car, using it for what I used it for. No, it was mostly like first car, good to get it out of the way. It was awesome to have at the time. I really did appreciate it. I don't want to sound like one of those, kids who didn't know what they had in a way. I was really fortunate to have a car, but it was not the one I wanted. It was not the one I dreamt about. It was not something I'd ever really want to go back to other than for that feeling of, there's no time like the first time, but
Right,
you
yeah,
look
but-
back on it and the first time was never really that good.
Yeah, you're like, I don't need to go back. There's no reason to go back.
No. Well, tell me, Sylas, I'm really curious about your history. I think you alluded to your first car in a previous episode. Why don't you flesh out that vision for us a little bit? How did you come into possession of this car and what led up to that?
Yeah, I feel like maybe my story in contrast is going to be a little bit different. Now, I grew up in more of a car family, right? So I was very fortunate that, my dad had some interesting cars, and he had a Mercedes that was his car that he used, and he had some cool old classic cars. And in the beginning of me turning and getting closer to the age of being, 15 and a half and getting the permit, and like that's when the itch really started. And being a part of a car family, it's kind of like, yeah, it's more welcomed of get your license, get a car, let's like get this thing going and
Get on with it.
and let me pass on the addiction with my kids essentially. And so originally my first car was going to be a hand-me-down that was already in the fleet. And it was going to be a 1989 Mercedes 560 SEL.
Ooh,
It was blue
running in luxury.
with blue interior.
Very nice.
And it was interesting that my mom had always loved large sedans. And her dream car was an old Mercedes S600, like the I guess the late 90s era. I don't know the chassis codes of Mercedes as well as I do of
It's
BMWs.
W something.
Yeah, W1 something.
Sure, right.
Anyway, and so she had always loved these long sedans, and this Mercedes, it still exists within the family.
Oh my God.
And we call it the blue car because it's the blue car. And so that was originally going to be my first car, and it was decently reliable, V8, a lot of room in it, automatic transmission. However, there was a decision of, no, this is not going to be your first car, because being young and into cars, there was a thought process that I might be getting into an accident within the first handful of years of having my license. Statistically, that's usually what happens.
Fair
right?
enough, yeah.
Is kids usually wreck cars or they get into car accidents and they're idiots. And so the decision of getting into my first car was like, no, we want to get you something a little bit newer than a 1989. We want to make sure that it has full airbags, full safety equipment. There was a little bit more of like, hey, we're going to help you out, make sure that you're safe out there on the roadways. And so it kind of opened up like, okay, I'm going to have an option here. Like if they're going to force me to get something new, like, they're going to have to somewhat help out with that, because I'm not going to be able to afford something newer than 1980s, 1970s, whatever the case is. And so then I started like rummaging in my brain of like, okay, like if the budget's going to be this, like how efficient can I be? How like sporty, how nice can I get within this limited budget that I could potentially have to get a newer car?
And the requirement was airbags and safety gear. Was those the kind of things?
Yes, it had to be relatively new. So it couldn't be, I think back then it was like 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So 5 years old or newer.
Got it.
And I mean, if we're thinking about like when I was getting my license and stuff like that. Like, this is in the mid, like, 2010s, right? And so there's a difference between, like, a 2005 and a 2012.
Oh, for sure.
Significant difference in this time frame of, like,
yeah.
safety. If we think about, like, an E46 M3 versus an E90 M3, like, there's a lot more airbags.
I would say that's like a generational change.
Right. There's a lot more structural integrity. Like, so there was a lot more focused on, like, the safety side of stuff. And so I was looking into it, and I'm like, okay, I'm starting to do, like, my research. And I'm like, back then I was, like, really into cars and really doing research and, like, looking up everything. And I'm like, God, like, all right, what do the journalists say of, like, is, like, a really good introductory car? And the Volkswagen GTI would always come up.
All right.
And I remember I was diehard watching Top Gear. And in Top Gear, for whatever reason, they always said, like, the Volkswagen GTI. It always circled back that, like, the GTI was, like, this amazing thing and this significant thing. And I was like, all right, maybe a Volkswagen GTI. And also during this time was when I first discovered, like, performance magazines, or, like, stance magazines. And I got into, like, Volkswagen magazines. And I'm like, Volkswagens are really cool. And you could modify them and put wheels on them and do all this crazy stuff. And so then I got locked in. I was like, Volkswagen GTI. Like, that's going to be the car, you know, bang for buck, fun level, all those things, check, check, check. It's going to be within the budget. I can get one that's, like, relatively new. You can find different generations. So I ended up with a Mark 6 GTI.
Wow, that's a pretty good first car.
Amazing first car. Like,
Yeah.
Way out there, like, incredible first car. And so I was still made fun of for it, even though it was a nice car. Like, I still got a lot of flack of, like, being in this GTI, this Golf.
Wow, what do you think it would have been like rolling around in the Mercedes by comparison?
I feel like not that many people would have, like, paid attention.
Yeah.
Like, I would have been, I don't know, like,
It seemed like kind of like an old person's car or something.
yeah, it would, you know, it wasn't like the nicest, thinking about Mercedes, it wasn't the nicest thing in the world, you know? I think it would have kind of, like, just been, like, weird or bizarre. Like, I know that I've seen plenty of, like, high schoolers nowadays that have, like, the old diesel Mercedes.
Yeah, it's kind of like a NorCal thing. Maybe it's like an old hippie thing, like the old
maybe.
Mercedes, and you convert it to like biodiesel or something.
It kind of seems like the kid that's into theater has the old Mercedes. I don't know how else to describe
Or a
it.
Volvo, one of the two of those.
They're
right?
artsy, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, they're interesting. They might smoke cigarettes from France or something like that in their with their old Mercedes going to high school.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know. So I think thankfully I got into the Volkswagen, and like, for me, that car really, like, sparked my interest of driving, because that vehicle was such an amazing driver's car, even though it's front wheel drive. And as we learned from Max Verstappen, driving front wheel drive is kind of like anti-driving. But as a teenager, I could take anything I could get, right? It didn't matter what kind of, you know, vehicle it was, as long as it was, like, fun. And that car was 10 out of 10 fun, and I would take it out on drives and go out to the coast and do all sorts of stuff with it and put plenty of miles on it. Now, what's interesting is I don't really consider the GTI, it was my first car. I don't consider it really, like, my first car. Because once again, it was one of those things where my parents were like, hey, we got to get you something new, like this, that, the other, like a lot of parameters, and they wanted to help out with it. So I didn't feel like it was, like, my own, right? In that way, that it was kind of, they got it for me in that sense, and making sure that I was safe and all that sort of stuff. And so I really consider, because I didn't have that car for that long. I had it through high school and about halfway through college. And then that's when I got my E36 M3. And, like, for me, that was the first time of, like, that I felt like I got myself a car.
Right.
And so for me, I always have considered my E36 as my first car.
Wow. Okay. So the GTI was sort of like a family car.
Right.
Right.
Which, it was a great car, and it was kind of boring in a sense. And, you know, because it was something that my parents helped me out with, like, I wasn't allowed to, like, modify it or touch it or do anything with it. And once again, that's kind of why I didn't really consider it, like, my first car, because I didn't get to develop that, like, connection with it.
It's interesting because so many people I know who have had GTIs or Golfs, they were super into the tuner culture of that.
Yes, and it was great.
And there's so many options, right, for how people would modify these cars.
Yeah.
I remember hearing the conversations and not even understanding all the terminology at the time. My friends would drop these like, oh, I went with the catback exhaust and all these things. I'm kind of like nodding like I know what they're talking about. I've since come to understand those terms. But at the time, it was just like, sounded like this exotic kind of thing. Oh, weird, this car from Germany you can do all these strange things to, and you make it louder or sportier or faster or handle better or whatever it was.
Yeah, and so like that's all the stuff I wanted to do with it. I was like, oh, like I want to get this catback exhaust, and I can do like the APR tune. I can do this, that, the other, and it was like, no, you can't. It's not like we're letting you have the car. Like, no, you can't do any of that stuff.
You're
And I
not
was
going to
like,
avoid the warranty.
right, exactly. And I was like, okay, kind of lame. And so like that's when, being in college, I was like, all right, I want to look for something that I can like be mine and I can do what I want with it. And at that moment, being into Volkswagens and starting to get into like the Euro car culture, I was like, what is the natural progression here of going from a front wheel drive? And I was like, well, I want something rear wheel drive. And it's like, okay, what's a cool rear wheel drive company that's also European? BMW.
Right.
And I was like, awesome. I'll look for the BMWs. I really want an M3. And I was like, okay, what's the cheapest M3 that I can find?
Right.
And that was why I landed on the E36 chassis, because in that time, those cars, you could find them for, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000.
Oh, right.
And you can get an M3. And I was like, dude, I'm sold. Like, if I can get an M3, like, that's going to be legit. Like, I got the badge. I got, like, everything that comes with M and motorsport, but just do it the cheapest way possible. And so, like, that process took a handful of years because, once again, being picky and into all the specs and all the details, wanting a sedan version and all the other stuff that went along with that in that process, and was able to find one basically a year later of searching that was within budget and was what I wanted. And that's the thing is, like, once I made the jump into the E36, a lot of people, like, even my brother always asked me, like, oh, like, do you miss the GTI, or would you want to go try to find another one, or whatever the case? I'm like, no, like, that served its purpose. It was awesome. It was great. It was unbelievable. It was an excellent car, but, like, completely changed my kind of taste into cars. Once I got into BMWs, I was like, no, now my sights are just on the next BMW, the next M3 that I can get.
That's cool. How did you find the reliability of the older car coming into your possession versus the newer one? I guess one of the reasons parents are like, get the newer one that has a warranty or the airbags or whatever is you'd think, cars used to be pretty unreliable. They required a lot of maintenance, but something newer, you just kind of drive it and you bring it to the dealer for service or whatever. And then you go into this car that's like 15 years old.
Yeah, and it had some issues, like any BMW does. And I tell anyone that's looking into getting into an M3, whether it's an E30, E36, E46, any of them, they all have their things. Mm-hmm. And so I got this E36. It was pretty fresh, like not a lot done to it. Uh-huh. It was owned by a guy that worked at BMW of Portland. So I was like, cool, BMW guy, he has access to BMW parts. The only thing it had on it was a Dynon intake, a Dynon tune, and it had the Z3 shifter in it. So a little bit of a shorter throw. Rest of it was stock. And I realized that I ran into some of those stock components were at their time to wear out by the time I bought the car. So
what kind of mileage did it have when you got it?
I bought it with 104,000 miles.
Okay.
And the first thing that went was the clutch. And so I remember I got the car back and I was in college and I brought it back and I was like showing my roommates who were also car guys. And I was like, dude, let's go take it for a spin. Let's go out. Like, come on, you got to check it out. Like, this thing's sick. And it was a rainy night and I went to school in Santa Clara. So there was a lot of like industrial areas around San Jose that you can go find and like go have some fun. And I remember we were in the rain and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to do burnout. Like, I'm going to like, because it was a manual transmission, I'm going to dump the clutch. And all of a sudden, like, revved it up, dumped the clutch, and the revs went up, but the wheels weren't spinning. Uh-oh. And I was like, this thing shouldn't have an issue breaking the tires loose in the rain. And I was like, oh, what's that smell?
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh, God, clutch is done. Clutch is gone. Oh, and so that was rough. Like the first thing, like, right off the bat. And I was like, man, I really should have stayed within my budget. Like, that dealing with the maintenance side of it in the very beginning of owning this car was a little bit stressful. So clutch was the first thing to get replaced. And then the infamous thing with E36s is their cooling systems.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was down the road a little bit, but that was something that needed to be dealt with as well. And now, like, looking back, and I had to look up the date because I remember taking a photo of when I got that car. It was back in 2015. And I still have that car. And so I've had that car for 10 years now, which is unbelievable to think about.
Wow.
And once again, the reason why I considered my E36 my first car is just everything I've been through with it. And that's one of those cars where it's like the attachment of and being connected with a vehicle is to just such an extent that like I can never imagine getting rid of that car. And it's been through so much and like different styling and viewpoints of my own in regards to automotive and the looks that it's gone through and all the stuff that I've had to do to it through the years of the many things of BMWs that break, and then you replace them with better things and it slowly turns into like, you know, this complete unit of a car that you've now built over time. And so like to me that's the one that I consider the most special, where, you know, I think when we usually think as car enthusiasts of like the first car, there's the difference between the first car versus like the first car that we think about of like, no, this to me is like my start as a car enthusiast.
I get that for sure. Did you have to replace the clutch again after that initial?
No. So when I replaced the initial clutch, I had the foresight and the mentality of like, if anything breaks, replace it with an upgraded part. So then you feel like I would want to upgrade these things to begin with, and now it's just presenting me with the opportunity to do so. And so when the clutch went out, I put in a better clutch. So it's got a stage 2 clutch in it and a lightweight flywheel. So I was like, if I'm in there, let's add some stuff. In hindsight, was that the right thing to do? No. When I did it to put in the upgraded clutch, I was like, well, if I ever want to make more power down the road, I should probably have a better clutch. I've never made more power because I've always just loved the stock power, but now I have an aggressive clutch and a lightweight flywheel. So sometimes like getting it going, it's very chattery because it is that upgraded unit.
Spoken like a true BMW enthusiast. It's not a failure. It's an opportunity to upgrade.
See, it's all about mindset. Owning BMWs is a lot about mindset.
That's so great. And your friends were pretty happy about this acquisition? Like they thought this was a cool car to get and you got to, you know, run around with them in there? Or did they have different tastes and they're like, why are you going with this weird old European car instead of something newer and more reliable?
Yeah, so in contrast, the GTI, like I talked about in the previous episode, I got made fun of in high school for driving that thing around, that it was like a hatchback was a Prius or, you know, this like sissy car.
That's
I was like,
crazy.
no, it's like, no, this thing's cool. It's got the red like trim on it. It looks sick. Like it's cool. I had to like convince people that a GTI was cool, and I got made fun of.
And you have to talk about how this thing could be modded, even though mine's not, in all these ways.
Yeah, like those people that were making fun of me weren't even car people.
Right.
They were just like people making fun of me. And I was like, interesting. So then when I got into the E36, like at this point, like I started developing like, you know, a good friend group. And I think once like I got into the E36, my friends that I had were like, oh, dude, this thing's so sick. Like they kind of knew like about BMWs and like stuff like that. So like it wasn't like this, what are you doing? So I think a lot of people were like really about it. And once I had got the E36, like then I started making so many more friends within the BMW community. And so like I think that was another thing that was like really eye-opening for me, is having a certain car opens up a community within the car community. Not like if you have this car, like you can't talk to these people and like you got to pay to play. Not like that in that sense, but like getting into BMWs comparative to Volkswagens, I was amazed at like how much larger the community was.
Right.
Where I think Volkswagens are really popular on the East Coast and like tuning them and doing that sort of stuff. Where like on the West Coast, like I didn't really find anyone else that had like a Volkswagen. And that like, unless every time I like saw another person in a GTI when I was driving, it was always like an old person. And I was like, okay, this isn't my crowd. Like, it's like there's no kids that I knew that had them. But then when I got into the E36 and the BMW community, it was like a lot more younger people that wanted to modify their cars, like more of like the scene.
That's interesting.
And like I would definitely say out of all of the car communities, like the BMW community is probably the strongest, which is like I'm really glad that I got into that, because in regards to BMWs, price-wise, you can find really cheap ones. There's more expensive ones, which creates this big spectrum.
Right.
And also with a BMW, you can make it into a stance car. You can make it into a performance car. You can make it into a track car. You can make it into a drift car. Like, you can do kind of anything with a BMW. So kind of like that community, the attraction to the chassis really has a broad appeal. And so once again, like I kind of need to give my E36 more credit of the doors it's opened and the opportunities it's presented of having that car and engaging with the community that car has opened up for me.
That's super cool. One of the things I think about with the first cars that people have is every once in a while people get really nostalgic about them and they actually try to go and find them. Like not the same model, but like literally the exact same car, like down to the VIN. Would you ever do that with that GTI that you had?
No, I don't think so. Like, it's just one of those things where it kind of served its purpose. And, like, I definitely have that feeling 100% about my E36, that if that car, if I ever had to sell it for any reason, I could see myself later down the road being like, I'd like to find that car back.
Kind of wanted to keep track of it.
Yeah. So, like, the E36, 100%. And like, knowing that I have that feeling about that car and thinking about my GTI and be kind of like, like, I know for me that car, like, didn't have that same sort of, like, substance or weight for me.
Interesting. Well, I feel that too because, my first car, this Chevy Cavalier, wound up not giving me that same feeling like you were talking about. Like, it was my first car. I mean, it was legitimately mine to use.
Yeah.
But it kind of wound up with me. I didn't go and choose it, and I didn't go through the process of really embracing it as my own because it was clearly mine. I mean, I got it.
Right.
But it wasn't the thing I sought out and looked after and was really trying to get into the community and learn about those cars. It was just purely functional transportation.
Yeah.
My second car, that I guess would have been your E36, was something I got just before the senior year of high school. And it was a 1985 Nissan 300ZX.
Ooh, see, that's a good car.
Right. And at the time, it felt like, oh, this is a badass car. And a combination of money I put away and my parents helped kick in a little bit for it. There were some things about it now, again, in retrospect, I'd say, oh, I wouldn't go back and I wouldn't pick the automatic. It was the automatic.
Yeah.
The turbo would have been cool, but I couldn't afford it, so I didn't get the turbo. And the car looked really sporty and looked like it should be screaming fast, but it just wasn't, right? It was super underpowered.
Yeah.
It was, again, one of these mid-'80s cars. But it really did sort of open me up to that world of Japanese cars that I'd known about and I'd been interested in. There's models that I really liked, but sort of set in motion that warm feeling I have for cars from that era and those kinds of cars to the point where I've wound up with several more Japanese cars later in life, several Nissans, probably because of that first Z that I had.
Yeah.
And the amount of fun that I would have going out with my friends. It was a 2-seater with a hatchback. And we would still go out with 4 people in the car. And 2 people would be crouched down in the back in the hatchback, and the other 2 would be riding in front in style. And it had T-tops. It had a digital dash with that sort of waveform display that was the cross product of your speed and the RPM. And it spoke. It was one of those cars from the 80s that had the lady's voice who'd come and say, "Your lights are on. Your door is ajar." Things like that. And it was just seemed so futuristic and really just cool in that way. So that was the car that I had that really influenced me.
And so with the Z, which it sounds like that's like your first enthusiast car, right? The first car that makes you feel like I'm a car enthusiast, I'm into the cars. Now, would you find yourself now wanting to go back and find a Z?
Kind of. Like anytime there's a Cars and Coffee or a meet and there's a Z from that era there, I'd say like 84 to 86 in particular, they all shared a body style, but there were minor differences that still to this day I can look at and go, oh, the bumper is painted a contrasting color from the body, so it's probably an 85. And it doesn't have that spoiler on the back. Yeah, and to do that kind of like really narrow down of the vehicle.
Dive.
So I still see them and I look for those things. But I've had a couple other nostalgia car ownership experiences where I went back and acquired something like I had at one point in time, and it's never lived up to the hype.
Yeah.
It's never been as good as I remembered it being. It was never as good as it seemed like it would be to be back in it. It was fun for 5 minutes. You know, all those memories crashed back into reality, into existence for me, and they were fun at the time. But the need or desire I'd have today to get back into that exact same car is pretty minimal. Like, I'd need to check the box on a lot of other cars that I'd really want to get out of my system first.
Right.
Before I'd go back and find that kind of model. But I do still have a warmth for it. Like literally anytime I see one, if I see an owner of one of those cars, I have to chat them up and say, hey, is that the 86? And they'll be like, yeah, how'd you know it was the 86? I'm like, oh, well, I can tell because there's this trim on the back that's different than on the 84s and 85s. And so that's always kind of a nice thing to be able to commiserate, or rather to like align with other people because they have a thing and I don't have that thing. And I can't say I'm part of that community now, but I was at one point and I really appreciated it. And I still look back on it really fondly. So I think there's a connection I still have to it, but not enough to make me want to go and actually acquire another one.
Yeah, it's almost like letting the memory be the memory.
Yeah,
It's like
for sure.
it's more fun to like reminisce about than it would be to actually have. And no, it's been awesome to go back in time and think about these cars that started our interest. Maybe not started our interest in automotive culture, but like at least got our start in terms of getting connected with cars and what those vehicles were and reliving some of those memories of the good, bad, the ugly, and maybe what it turned into of presenting a nice opportunity to get into a car that did shape and morph what our taste was in cars.
I like these stories because they sort of give you the answer to the question of how did you get into this? What was your influence? Why is it that you like this kind of thing and not this other
Right.
kind of thing? So it's just cool to kind of be able to reflect on that. And sometimes you continue on that direction. To your point, you have your 3, 4, 5 BMWs deep, at least at this point.
Yeah.
And I never went back and got another Chevy Cavalier, let's just say.
Yeah, but I mean, you did get some JDM stuff. So
I did, yeah.
I would look at the Z as more of like the true like first car.
Yeah, I need to think about it that way more. I think in strict order of I had this one, then I had this one. Yeah, the Cavalier was first. But the first car I really embraced as my car that I got to use the way I wanted, the one I went to the auto zone and picked up those weird louvers for the windshield wipers and put them on that car proudly and said, yeah, man, the reds don't match, but it still looks badass. That definitely gave me more of that feeling to the point where, yeah, more Nissans have come into my life since then and other Japanese cars as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this has been really cool. Thanks for sharing your stories of the Chevy Cavalier.
Always fun to share that. Thanks for everything, Silas.
And thanks for listening. This has been Cold Start.